Hello there. I'm the writer, terrible actor, and producer of the Star Trek Voyager Season 8 podcast. Star Trek Reverie is my offshoot podcast where I want to informally discuss Star Trek from the mindset of a writer and a fan. Please don't forget to check the links in the show notes for more information. So, Strange New Worlds Episode 3, Ghosts of Illyria, directed by Leslie Hope, written by Akela Cooper and Bill Wolkoff. I find myself always wanting to discuss the writing at the beginning of the episode, because I think the writing is the most important thing. Other people may disagree, that's fine. These two writers, I'm going to judge them based on their writing credits, so buckle up. Together, they've written a mix of some fantasy, children's science fiction, that means Star Wars Rebels and Tron Uprising being two of them. Many TV shows, not some, many TV shows I've never heard of that haven't basically broken out into the mainstream, apart from Marvel's Luke Cage, but then you've got the Marvel banner attached to that, so it makes sense that that's the one I've heard of. And just looking at their writing credits, The 100 looks interesting in its description, but it's a CW show, and being labelled as a CW writer on Twitter is shorthand for not very good, so I'm not sure whether I should check it out or not. Before we get into it, I want to share an observation that I've noticed, and I'm going to make a comparison to TOS. Not a canon comparison, just something that as an audience you pick up on. Because one of TOS's lasting problems is with its budget and CGI special effects, which obviously is just it's being a victim of its creation for its time. And some people, and this is fair on their part, can't get past the aesthetics. But the writing is never sort of faulted on that show. If it is, it's nitpicked. And obviously season 3 does have its problems. But the writing can stand the test of time. And there are episodes that modern shows or more modern shows try to riff off. Strange New Worlds seems to have the inverse of that problem, where the budget and the CGI are really good, but it has really bad writing. Especially when these two writers bring us such lines as "whatever tweaks your freak, pal," or "light hates dark, dark hates light," sort of anthropomorphizing the rotation of the sun. Sorry, that's medieval thinking, isn't it? The rotation of a planet around the sun. This dialogue is terrible. It isn't edgy, or if it's trying to be edgy, it shouldn't. And it doesn't do the story any favours. I guess the way this episode begins with "last time on Strange New Worlds" is going to be a thing, even though it's really not needed. However, I expected this episode to come because new viewers, like myself, needed an episode that showcased Una. Just as a reminder, I haven't really watched Discovery except for one episode in season 4, and then the rest has just been analysis videos on YouTube. But I actually know number one's name now, rather than just her being referred to as number one all the time. Her name is Una. So that's nice. And a lot of the criticism that people are pointing out in this episode are to do with the genetic issues, because this episode, with it being about genetic modification, contradicts the first episode, and it just causes some confusion as to how some of our characters think, which is what I'm going to get into. But if you remember in episode 1, they genetically modified the landing party so they look like aliens. Now that's confusing, right? Because there is a law against genetic modification, even if it's superficial. But if it is superficial, why not just use cosmetic surgery? That's probably why on Classic Trek, they always made a point of saying they're going to use surgery for the crew to pass as aliens on away missions. So with that said, let me get into the other issues I have with this story. And that is basically to do with a lot of the revelations made in this episode come about through no setup whatsoever. I'm going to list them for you. Una is genetically modified now, all of a sudden, and we all thought that Lan would be. And we only find out at the end of the episode. We don't know why, and in the episode we don't know why her body fires up, because we're just denied this information for story reasons. And she's of the same race as those who wiped themselves out, but just a different colony or something. So that's fine. And she hid her heritage during a critical situation, which should be reason to write her up, wouldn't you think so? That's why she's trying to hand her badge in at the end of the episode. But we're told, not shown, we're told that Lan has faced prejudice. Again, we've never seen it in the show, we're just being told. And she's upset at Una for lying to her because of this prejudice. And she said she's faced prejudice, even though she doesn't have any of Khan's augmented attributes. And, contradictory, she's never encountered enough prejudice to warrant changing her name. If the trauma was that bad, then surely you'd want to change your name and remove any association, because if you don't have a genetic association, Why keep the namesake? It's just like someone with a second name of Hitler. You'd want to change that shit right away, wouldn't you? I'll give you a personal example. When I was at school, I had a classmate whose family name was Wanklin, and they changed his name before he went into secondary school because he'd be bullied to hell for it, but we all found out anyway somehow. And for those that don't know, especially American listeners, wank is synonymous with jerk. So imagine a classmate called David Jerklin. He changed his name, so why wouldn't La'an, if it's so serious, she can just blend in with everybody else because she doesn't have the genetic modifications attached. So I don't buy La'an's turn of character when she's arguing against Una. And if anything, she's comparing augmented humans to augmented aliens. So I agree with Una in this discussion that her race's genetic modifications are different enough to not associate herself with those from Earth. So that makes me think, is La'an's thinking really that simplistic? It weakens her and makes her more unprofessional. Because is she that traumatized by the bullying that she can't make the distinction? And speaking of distinctions, how finely do you cut these hairs if you're talking about splitting hairs? Because how do you define prejudice? Because each alien species in the show is genetically different with different abilities, and they don't face any prejudice. Vulcans have pointy ears, which is a superficial thing that people today can easily rip on each other about, but Vulcans also have superior strength, and they have touch telepathy. Andorians have abilities as well, and so forth and so forth. So what's the difference really? The more aliens you meet, the wider variety of differences that are out there that you'll encounter. So it kind of dilutes the prejudice, really, if everyone is different, and then you're being super selective just based on something that happened historically. And while I was watching the episode, I kept thinking about Genghis Khan, because Khan Noonien Singh is a riff of Genghis Khan. And if you believe in the theory that 5% of the world has Genghis Khan's DNA, and a lot of them are centered in the Asia region, all those people, I know it's 1,000 years ago versus 200 years ago in the show, but none of those people care about what Khan did. If anything, they celebrate Khan. I just don't buy being upset about something my ancestor did 200 years ago, because I'm so far removed from that, and so are their victims. How is that a reflection of me? And then we're talking about people in 23rd century still being sort of showing animosity towards La'an for this. When it's been fixed, it's a problem that's been fixed. So where is the animosity coming from? From the new people that weren't around 200 years ago. Very confusing. And this makes me think back to her hypo spray pain issue in the earlier episodes, in episode 1 and 2, which I thought was alluding to that, because it turns out that La'an doesn't have any genetic modifications, and I thought she had, and that's why she could ignore the pain, but now it just seems like sheer willpower, equal to a Vulcan's, that's allowing her to not scream out in terror or go ow when she gets hit with this hypo spray. And let's take it even further. Let's go with Hemmer. Hemmer is an Andorian from an ice planet, and his species live underground. Why would he be affected by the virus in the same way as the humans and all the other aliens that live on the top side of a planet, or the surface side of a planet? His subspecies wouldn't need vitamin D. So why is he trying to beam a part of the mantle onto the Enterprise? My other issue is Una says she's hidden her true story, or her true heritage, because of bigotry. And yet no one actually cares in the show. Even in the revelation in front of Chapel, none of them are like, oh, you've been genetically modified. In fact, if anything, Chapel and Mbenga are just professional about it. And Chapel even says, is there a chance we can use her body to fix the virus problem? And then when she tells the captain, he's not even bothered. Who is doing the racist things to her? And I don't buy Mbenga's line that would find new bigotries. There was an opportunity to find a bigotry. The whole crew could find a new bigotry to poke fun at with someone, and they don't. And isn't it exhausting to finally conquer space travel and the ability to harness antimatter, and yet when you go into space, oh, you're different to me. I'm in Starfleet, and we're supposed to explore strange new worlds, and yet you're strange. I'm going to be a bigot now towards you. Anyway, two more things I had an issue with. Mbenga all of a sudden has a child hidden on board. That is an episode all by itself. I don't think it should have been forced into this at the end. And the daughter's condition is so serious, he could pull her out of the transporter to read her bedtime stories. And Una even says, this is not a nitpick, but, well, it is a nitpick, but it's just fun. Una said she'd like to meet her. Well, you could have done, because he's pulling her out to read her bedtime stories. You could have introduced her to Una, because she's already bored of these stories that he's reading to her anyway. My last issue is the episode spends a ton of time with Pike and Spock on the planet, and yet nothing comes of it. Not even an attempt at communication when they find out the aliens are the ones that they were looking for or they thought were lost, but they're just energy beings. And it feels like that whole thing was a reason just to get Pike off the ship and Spock off the ship so Una can be in charge. Spock, by the way, after 3 episodes, doesn't feel like other Vulcans. If anything, Ethan Peck feels like he's doing an impersonation of Teal'c from Stargate. And I did find a continuity error with canon, but not with TOS, not with Classic Trek, but inside of New Trek itself. And this was something I discovered on Reddit. Basically, when Hemmer is talking about the biofilter's operation, he contradicts the continuity of what was said in Discovery. Burnham and Detmer say that biofilters need to know what something is in order to filter it out. But he says if they don't know what it is, then they filter it out. Now, isn't that interesting? The same writers of the same show can't even follow their own continuity. By the way, I don't actually care that the pattern buffer can hold a person now indefinitely. Again, if I was going to take issue with that, that's because Classic Trek said that as a rule, and I'm not going to go there. But surely a cryostasis pod is more reliable to hold someone longer term, because the ship can run out of power, transporter buffer can be lost because it's only an active memory, things like that. I just thought that was weird and unnecessary. But if the daughter is in cryostasis, you can't keep waking her up, thawing her, and then putting her back to freeze just to read her bedtime story, can you? Some things I did like because I want to end this on a positive note. Hemmer engineered the perfect solution to getting as much light as possible. That seemed in character. He devised an engineering solution, so him trying to beam up a part of the planet just so he can get a full blast of light is really funny. And I liked how at first Una took him seriously because he was doing engineering stuff and she thought there was a point to it. And then he's like, yeah, I just want to get in front of it. And if you remember at the beginning of the episode, Kyle, the transport officer, couldn't get the transporter to work in order to beam the away team up, and Hemmer fixes it with Kyle saying, oh, how did he do it? And Hemmer says, don't forget I'm a genius. And I thought that was them attempting to handwave technobabble away. Then I thought, actually, that's fine. It's kind of clever because it didn't need explaining. And this makes me like Hemmer a lot, and he's fast becoming my favorite character on this show. The other nice thing that I liked is that this episode doesn't discuss Pike's fate. We've actually got enough time to focus on the story, and I guess they've made their point for now. We'll get it later, I'm sure. And I laughed when Una deleted her log. I knew it was coming. I knew she was going to pale moonlight it unnecessarily. Just like, what was the point? And it's trying to be dramatic, and yet there isn't actually any drama to what has been done in this episode because it's so confusingly written. And speaking of which, if I could rewrite this episode, I'd have Una at least act like she knew something about being on the planet because it's from her alien race. But she didn't say anything or act untoward or act awkward about being there, which further confuses the story when the revelation comes out. And I wouldn't have had Mbenga's daughter introduced here because of the technical failures of the transporter. And since the transporter emits light, you can get around this biofilter canon continuity issue by just saying the biofilters, emphasis on bio, can't filter out light particles. And that's how everyone gets infected, because they said in the show, the virus travels by light. You didn't need to go into a lot of detail about the biofilters. Again, the writing is confusing. They don't explain how Hemmer gets the extra power to the transporter to beam them up, but they do go into great detail about the biofilters, and then they open themselves up to nitpicking like this, when you can just think of a better reason to get the virus on board the ship. And just so the aliens aren't a waste of time, because when they find out who they were at the end of the episode, they didn't communicate with them, but they could have done. You could have rewritten it so that they could communicate with the aliens, and they have the cure with the virus. I mean, that's the standard Star Trek trope, isn't it? The bad guy that you think is the bad guy actually has the cure, but they can't communicate with them until the very end, and then, oh, great, thank you, great. And maybe, the aliens just farted or something, which infects normal humans, and then the aliens, all they need to do is just use some Febreze to remove the fart smell to cure everyone with their light energy hands. And then you end the episode on a positive note because they can communicate with the aliens, and then Pike can say, oh, we will send a science team to try to free them, so you can rescue them later. That was just my quick come-to-mind idea. I don't know why, but I forget trying to give you a rating for this show. The first 2 episodes, I said they were a C. This one, because of the problems with the genetic modification, just the characterizations, and of course the dialogue. I'm going to give this one a D, and it's trying to be something at the end, and it doesn't deserve that. That's why I'm going to rate this a little bit lower than the first two. Okay, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.